Japan reels from its worst earthquake in recorded history. New pictures emerge of the tsunami that slammed into the eastern seaboard. National broadcaster NHK captured the moment the waves hit the city of Kamaishi. Terrified residents rushed to the safety of higher ground and watched. The power of water unleashed and made all too clear. Across the east coast, it was a similar scene of devastation. This amateur video showed houses being crushed like tin cans. Communities have begun the long and painful process of rebuilding their lives. Rescue teams are searching for the missing along hundreds of kilometers of coast. They're combing through towns and villages that have been reduced to splinters.
Is it a dream? I just feel like I'm in a movie or something. Whenever I'm alone, I have to pinch my cheek to check whether it's a dream or not.
Infrastructure such as the airport in Sendai City remain disabled, making it hard to get aid to those who need it most. Some emergency supplies are being moved to the worst-hit areas. The US military is using its large airbase in Okinawa to get food and medical supplies to victims. But this Japanese Air Force base in Miyagi Prefecture was not spared. Thousands of people have been moved to temporary shelters, while relatives searched for missing loved ones.
My son might have been engulfed by the tsunami. I hope he is taking shelter somewhere. I'm struggling to locate him.
Azhar Sukri, Al Jazeera.
Japanese officials say they are facing the possibility of multiple nuclear meltdowns following Friday's 8.9 magnitude earthquake. The warning comes a day after an explosion in Unit 1 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear complex. Officials began venting radioactive steam to relieve pressure inside the reactor vessel that houses the overheated uranium fuel. They knew there was a risk of explosion, but chose to do so because they needed to keep circulating cool water on the fuel rods to prevent a meltdown. Japan's chief cabinet secretary says Unit 3 now faces a possible meltdown, and there's the danger of a hydrogen explosion. Yukio Edano said neither reactor was near the point of complete meltdown, and he was confident of escaping the worst scenarios. In a complete meltdown, the power plant systems collapse and it loses the ability to keep temperatures under control. That could release uranium and dangerous contaminants into the environment and pose major widespread health risks. Edano said the radioactivity released into the environment so far was so small it didn't pose any health risks. More than 170,000 people have been evacuated from the region near the reactors. Up to 160 people close to the reactors may have been exposed to radiation. At an evacuation center 40 miles from the troubled reactors, medical experts had checked out about 1,500 people for radiation exposure. This man says the place where he works might be contaminated, so he came to the center to be checked out. Meanwhile, the number of Japanese nuclear reactors under states of emergencies rose by 1 to 6 Sunday, 3 at the Daiichi complex, 3 at another nearby complex. Matt Friedman, The Associated.
There's been another blast at a stricken Japanese nuclear power plant, the second hydrogen explosion at Fukushima Daiichi in 3 days. The detonation at the plant's Unit 3 sent a massive column of smoke into the air and was felt 40 kilometers, some 25 miles away. Officials said 11 workers were injured. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yukio Edano read a statement about what happened.
We assume
that there was a similar explosion at the third reactor as the one that occurred at the first reactor. At this point, we can confirm that the container of the reactor is sound. Experts also expect that the possibility of radioactive particles set free is low.
Still, the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan, which had been engaged in aid operations over the weekend, did report detecting low-level radioactive contamination, though it can't be clear if that came from Monday's explosion. The U.S. military says it has now shifted its offshore forces away from the plant. Cabinet Secretary Edono said the blast has triggered an order for people left in the area to stay indoors.
And as we've heard earlier, there's been another explosion at the Fukushima nuclear complex in northeastern Japan. Meanwhile, crews are fighting to cool down the overheated fuel rods at the Fukushima nuclear plant. That's considered key to averting disasters, as they contain radioactive materials. And Christopher Simers, a professor at the Tokyo University, explains how an explosion might occur and what the worst-case scenario could mean for local residents.
The damage to the fuel rods, in this case, will not cause a fire. And again, this is a key difference between the disaster going on at the moment, though it is a disaster, and the Chernobyl incident. The situation is the fuel rods can melt, they can become oxidized, and the rods are protected by a zirconium alloy coating, and when that comes into contact with water, the result is the production of a large amount of hydrogen, which is of course explosive, and that causes a large explosion, as we saw yesterday. Whether the radiation is coming from Fukushima Daiichi reactor number 1 or number 3, or more locally, is a very important question to solve. I would hazard the guess that it is coming from Fukushima Daiichi number 1. Now, there are different types of radiation being released into the atmosphere. The good news is that a lot of the steam which escaped in the explosion from Daiichi reactor number 1 building yesterday is relatively light isotopes. These isotopes cannot really cause long-term damage to human health. The more serious problem is that they have also detected isotopes of iodine and cesium in the area around the Fukushima explosion. These are much heavier isotopes, and that means that if they get into the human body, or if they get into the soil or the water supply, they can cause long-term radiation poisoning.
Thousands of Japanese who live near a nuclear power plant are being urged to evacuate that area. Today's massive quake apparently causing a problem in the plant's cooling system. Dr. Mikio Kaku, a professor of physics at the City University of New York, explained the danger today on Good Morning America.
We have to take this very seriously. Every nuclear power plant has 2 layers of defense. First, the brakes. You put in the control rods, stops the chain reaction. Second, you dump cold water on it. That's the emergency core cooling system. That apparently has malfunctioned. That's what's causing concern. The impossible accident, the accident involving the fail-safe mechanism of just dumping water on this runaway reactor, it seems to be malfunctioning, according to Japanese television.
An official says if the outage in the cooling system persists, eventually radiation could leak into the environment. In the worst case,
Well, Japan has declared an emergency alert at another nuclear power plant in the northeast of the country. Radiation levels of about 700 times higher than normal have reportedly been detected at the facility in Onagawa. Well, authorities are currently investigating their source. Well, for more opinion on the threat of a nuclear crisis in Japan, let's talk to Harvey Wasserman. He's written extensively on the subject of a sustainable green-powered Earth. He joins me live now from Ohio. Many thanks for being with us here on RT. Now, Japanese officials insist that there is no danger for people in relation to the crises affecting its nuclear plants. Well, obviously, they do want to avoid panic, but just how bad really is the current situation there, do you think?
Very bad. It's very bad. We have now reports of 6 reactors that are under stress. We've had at least a partial meltdown at least one reactor. We've already had to attempt to flood a reactor with seawater. The problem is that when nuclear reactors go down, they still require electric power to operate pumps to keep the reactors and the spent fuel cool, and this power has been lacking, and we could conceivably, God forbid, have 6 meltdowns here. This is not a situation to be taken lightly. I do not believe the Japanese government when they say that no one is at risk. They're saying no one's at risk, but simultaneously they're evacuating people. I want to applaud them for evacuating the people, but this is a situation where the risk is very, very substantial.
Well, of course, as we've been saying, the Japanese government has repeatedly stressed that it does not believe people are at risk. But as we were saying, there is now trouble at this second power plant in Onagawa, away from the Fukushima plant. And that second issue started with a fire, which was quickly put out. But now radiation levels there are rising rapidly in the facility. So is there a danger that other nuclear facilities could experience difficulty there?
Well, we've actually had 3, and you have to remember there are multiple reactors at these facilities. Unlike other places in the world, the Japanese reactors are clustered. There were 7, for example, at Kashiwazaki in 2007 when they were hit by an earthquake, and all 7 of those reactors had to shut. There are 2 separate multiple facilities at Fukushima, and now we have Onagawa as well. You remember that 11 reactors were shut when the earthquake came. We don't know how many of those reactors are suffering from severe engineering and operational problems, but it looks like far more than was originally believed. This is a huge earthquake, which by some accounts has actually been upgraded to 9.0, which is just about the peak of the scale. And these reactors were not designed to sustain a 9.0 earthquake, even though people knew it was a possibility. So we have, as I say, 11 reactors are shut. We now know that 6 are under stress, any one of which could cause a hugely devastating radiation release. There is no way that the people of Japan are not in danger, and I'm afraid that a large enough release could affect Russia.
Well, indeed, the Japanese Prime Minister did earlier say that his country was facing its biggest crisis since the end of the Second World War. And moving on, Japan, as we know, it does experience minor earthquakes almost every day, doesn't it? So how safe do you think it really is for a country like this to even have nuclear power stations in the first place?
It's not safe at all. Those reactors should never have been built. I was in Japan in 1975, 76, and 78, and exactly this kind of scenario was discussed. People said you should not build these nuclear plants because something like we're seeing now could happen, and the government and the industry said no, we will have it under control, and we clearly see now that they don't have it under control. You have to remember this is the second time in less than 5 years that an earthquake has hit a major nuclear facility. The Kashiwazaki facility was hit with 7 reactors in July of 2007. Serious damage was done, not as serious as we see today, but nonetheless, this is an endemic problem that we knew was happening all along. There were many, many people in Japan that argued against these reactors being built, and now we're seeing the...
Hello everyone, welcome to Global Government News. Today is Monday, March 14th, 2011, and I'm Darko. Welcome everyone to this GGN exclusive coverage of the earthquake / tsunami in Japan. We only have a minute and a half left here that I can go through maybe 2 articles, and then we'll continue here in part 2 with some more video footage and some articles. Indonesia volcano erupts, prompting evacuations, and it says here one of Indonesia's most active volcanoes has erupted, sending lava and searing gas clouds tumbling down its slopes. Then moving on to Japan earthquake, scientists dismiss moon apocalypse as nonsense. And it says here death toll surpasses 1,600, 9,500 missing in one region. So the Fukushima nuclear plant is the focus of the world's attention right now, but the impact from the underlying earthquake and tsunami continues to grow. And then we have hundreds of bodies wash ashore in quake hit Japan. And then quake moved Japan coast 8 feet, shifted Earth's axis. And I was just reading about how the Chile earthquake actually moved the Earth's axis as well. And then also you have something that's naturally occurring. I believe it's naturally occurring, but the North Pole moving towards Russia. So Nuclear Crisis highlights history of cover-ups. A documentary filmmaker who has spent much of his career focusing on Japan's nuclear industry says it has a long history of cover-ups. He says in 2003, reactors across the country had to be shut down after a merged Tokyo Electric Company had accidents 17 plants in 2003 because they had been falsifying the records about what had been happening at them. You can join me in part 2. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.